Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 5 greatest Stravinsky conductors. Oh, yes, there are really quite a few of those, actually. And so, well, I have my list, and I'll bet you have yours. Don't you go to bed at night wondering who were the 5 greatest Stravinsky conductors? It's just one of those rhetorical questions that sort of, underpins the meaning of the universe. So let's get right to it, shall we? First, Riccardo Chailly. Chailly seems to be one of those conductors who always gets undervalued. But he made some amazing recordings, and his Stravinsky is absolutely sensational, beginning with that unbelievable Cleveland Rite of Spring. Pierre Boulez gets all the credit for doing Cleveland Rites of Spring, but Chailly's is more exciting, my God, and just as well played and spectacularly recorded by Decca. It really is one of those sort of under-the-radar performances that you should hear because it will blow your mind and your speakers. And then with the Concerto Bell, he went on to do a ton of other stuff, the neoclassical ballets, and the really, really beautiful performances, fabulously well played and sumptuously recorded. He deserves a place in the Stravinsky pantheon. So yeah, for sure. Next, Igor Markevitch. Now, Markevitch was a composer, and as a composer, he was an avant-gardist who was definitely in the Stravinskyan mold, an objectivist, icy cool, amazing craftsman, actually. And it's not surprising that when it came to conducting Stravinsky, he was incredible. Now, he didn't do all that much, but what he did was amazing. I mean, 2 Rites of Spring, which are really fine. The second one is thrilling beyond belief with the Philharmonia, the Symphony of Psalms, some of the shorter works. I mean, there's enough there. There's definitely enough there to give a sense of what was going on when he conducted Stravinsky. And he had a identification with the idiom, particularly the neoclassical works, the later pieces it was really, really pretty remarkable. So Markevitch is definitely on the list. Then Michael Tilson Thomas, beginning with his Rite of Spring. It's a lot of people started with really great Rites of Spring if they were going to be great Stravinsky conductors. Tilson Thomas did it first with the Boston Symphony, and that was a glorious recording, and it was coupled with the very rarely heard cantata King of the Stars, which is really weird. And so that was really nifty and nice to have. But then he went on to make all kinds of marvelous Stravinsky recordings, including Persephone, which nobody ever does. And it was a gorgeous recording in San Francisco. Those were mostly for RCA and the early ballets and Petrushka and things like that. It was all really just terrific. Actually, I think he played the piano in Petrushka. Somebody played the piano in Petrushka. Anyway, he was a remarkable Stravinskyan, totally to the manner born. Some people sort of grow up in the idiom. And he did. He was one of that generation of conductors who grew up knowing that Stravinsky was the most important contemporary composer and you had to do your Stravinsky. And he did his Stravinsky. Also, Esa-Pekka Salonen, sort of the next generation of conductors growing up who knew they had to do their Stravinsky. Salonen is also a composer. Salonen did amazing versions of some of Stravinsky's later works. He was consistent all the way through Stravinsky's oeuvre. Performances of great precision, rhythmic drive, enthusiasm, power, subtlety. It's really great stuff. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. And if you don't know Salonen's Stravinsky, you really should get to know it because he out-Boulezed Boulez himself. He had sort of just, that same kind of precision and objectivity, but with a sort of an extra oomph. Speaking of which, there is Pierre Boulez. Of course, we have to talk about Pierre Boulez when we talk about Stravinsky. His Sony recordings, particularly initially, were very, very exciting. His Rite of Spring was the ne plus ultra in objectivist Stravinsky stuff with Cleveland. Razor sharp, pellucidly clear. He did not quite duplicate that same level of clarity in his Deutsche Grammophon remakes. And actually, the interesting thing about Boulez and Stravinsky is that his Stravinsky was better the earlier you go, generally. Later on, Boulez kind of softened up a little bit. He got a little schmoozy. And as a result, his Stravinsky got a little bit duller because, he seemed to be, I don't know whether he lost interest or whether he was just remaking things on Deutsche Grammophon because he could, not because he should. He did that terrible Symphony of Psalms in Berlin that had the awful edit, which they fixed, by the way. So that was nice. I mean, the half a bar that was missing, and this is no longer missing, I believe. But his Sony Stravinsky recordings were absolutely remarkable, and standard setting at the time. And they deserve to be cherished for that reason, I think. And some of his later stuff was very good too. I mean, I'm not saying that, it all sucked equally. But Boulez, it's interesting, was sort of more interested in earlier Stravinsky than later, which I find fascinating given his own predilections. Maybe there was a reason for that, some deep-seated psycho-Freudian thing going on there. I don't know. But Stravinsky was a major component of Boulez's career as a conductor because, his tastes were really out of the ordinary for a conductor of his fame, actually. He didn't do the German standards, really. He was a modern music guy avant-gardist, actually, specialized in music of the Second Viennese School and atonal things and whatnot. And so he needed something that someone would listen to. And early Stravinsky was a good thing for him to latch onto. And so he latched. And it's a good thing that he did because those Sony recordings have held up extremely well. They still sound pretty terrific. And that, my friends, is actually, when I go back and think about it, before I just end this, Boulez's early Stravinsky recordings were really, really hot. I mean, that Firebird was fabulous. Song of the Nightingale. Yeah, it's great stuff. So, yeah, he definitely is up there. And I know I can think of at least 5 or 6 more that I didn't mention that could very well turn up on your list. And so I'm very curious to see if they do. Let me have it. And keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.